Morning.
Morning.
Call the Budget Committee to order and ask for approval of the minutes from October 13th. Moved by Supervisor Simpson, seconded by Supervisor Conover. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. The reason for the Budget Committee meeting today is our multi-year plan. This is a multi-year financial outlook. Going from this year, 2016, through 2020. I believe you have it in front of you. It projects the anticipated revenues, assumptions and growth. It also projects the expenses for the programs, services, known projects, contractual obligations, and anticipated costs going forward, i.e. wage increases and 4% increase in healthcare, those type of things. It also built into it is a 1.5% levy increase each year, 2% on pay increases. Also the two projects we have going, the court expansion and the NSTEM, is built into these numbers. And I wanted to get it before you and give you the opportunity to look at it, try to answer any questions you might have. I don't anticipate, you're going to sit here and analyze this here in the next 10 minutes, but try to answer questions today and plan on a future budget meeting next month. Supervisor Conover.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple of questions, initial questions. Number one, I'm glad about that footnote of the reserve that was set up, or that resolution 313, because I think that helps standardize the numbers, so for comparison purposes, in other words, that 24, 585, 629, and 15, I assume that had we taken that action sooner, that balance would have been reduced by that $4 million. Is that correct, Rob?
Yes.
Okay, so the adjusted number then for 15, at least one type of adjusted number, would be $20,108,120 in 15, which is more in line with the trend line, if you see what I mean. Otherwise, it becomes kind of a I don't want to say it's an aberration. It did come in, it did go into the fund balance, but it was a very specific kind of revenue. Question on all major fund revenues, 16 to 17, that decrease of $3 million, and then it bounces back up to the 144. You see that right there?
Yep.
What accounts for that glitch right there, that drop of, call it $2.5–3 million? Do we know? Joanne's not here?
Yep.
2016 is the amended budget after adoption. So you're looking at any amendments that happened this year, which could be grants or whatever.
Saying that the 144 is an estimated number.
It's an estimated.
Not 144. The 217 is what's been adopted. So in the 217 budget, are you saying that the revenue projected is 141,700, 414?
Correct.
And
Sometimes during the year we get amendments.
sure, no, I understand. But given the preceding years of, I'll take the preceding 3 years of revenue, 142, 146, 144, our expectation would be that revenue number would be a little better than that.
Which number are you looking at, Ron?
I'm looking at, you see adopted 17, you see where the revenue, all major revenues, you see where the revenue number.
Goes to 125?
Well, up on the revenue line, you can see it shows, I'll count it out from 15, 146,540,000, 144,951, but then it shows a decrease of 141,700 in the 17 adopted. And,
Down here?
I guess what I'm trying to.
Oh, you're down here.
I guess what I'm wondering is,
Line 27, Ken.
I'm just wondering that, not that I wanna be overly optimistic, but then you see in the following, in 18, you see it goes back up to 144?
Yes, in 2017, we did not budget a sales tax increase,
Right. Okay,
so that has a lot to do with it.
so that, I'll call it 2%, it might have been 1.5%.
1.5.
1.5% on the sales tax, is not shown there.
Right.
But,
And then you got a little extra money in CHIPS, right? You got a little extra money in CHIPS on the county roads? Yes, no?
You see that
5
in
year.
the answer.
Is that shown?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's a 5-year plan.
Yeah, it's gonna show in 17 too, I think.
17 it'll show, definitely show. 'cause
So that's gonna bump it up, yeah.
I mean, you never know what's gonna happen on the revenue number or the expenditure number, I guess, I just, that little, 3 million bounce right there. But that explains it on the sales tax side, that would, well, that would explain part of it, right? It only explains $1 million, say, of the 3 million?
Yeah.
I guess my question would be if you could take a look at that,
Okay.
as to what generated that number, the reasonableness of that number.
The up or the down, Ron?
Anytime I see a number drop like that, it's, especially on the revenue side, but then you see in the following year it goes back to 144, and I'm saying it's all looking out with a crystal ball, but why in that 1 year, we're showing the adopted number?
Well, the sales tax went up. If you look at the second page, it gives you a breakdown of what the revenues were. Then it shows the real other revenues are down. I don't get it either.
Right.
Don't know. Oh, there's a big interfund transfer number too. Is that the sale of the nursing home, 14 to 15? It went from 58,000 to 4,858,000. If on page 2,
Yeah.
line 17. That's the sale of the nursing home, correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
15 does what it says.
Right, I would assume.
So that's a big jump. You got a question over here, Frank, over in the corner.
Yes, Rachel?
What does, on that second page under the revenue on line 11, department income, that would account for that $2 million loss, or decrease in revenue that Ron's talking about. What does departmental income capture?
Any income that, you know, comes through the departments.
DMV stuff.
Right, the county clerk,
So what account,
fees.
I guess then Joanne, what's that $2 million drop there? It drops, there is, there was 1.9 million, in 2016 budget of, I think,
That's
and
right.
we had to take that out. So that would be the drop in the revenue, yeah.
Yep. That's probably a lot of it right there.
Yeah, that would explain it. But then we show it coming back the following year, if you see what I'm saying. We don't take that hit going forward, is my only point. It just spikes just from that 1 year. I don't wanna labor this point, we can look into it more deeply, it's just,
Yeah, I can analyze that and.
yeah, please. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
This is a question for the treasurer. Do you have a sense of, where you think we're gonna finish the year yet? I know it's a little early. for that, I know last year we, finished in pretty good shape. What's your sense for this year?
Well, I mean, the sales tax, I think, is gonna exceed where we were, so that's gonna be a big plus right there. The rest of it, well, it's hard to tell at this point, because we just don't have the information right now.
When do you think you might have that, say March, February,
Probably.
somewhere through there?
March, yeah. I mean, I haven't seen anything that I'm concerned about, okay? Me, so I mean, I just don't want you to get a negative feeling on it. I don't
Right.
have a negative feeling.
Right.
Especially with the sales tax being up, I think we're gonna be,
Right.
I think we'll be okay.
Our departments are, pretty consistent on leaving, anywhere from $1 million to $1.5 million, you know, unspent. Have been for the last few years, consistently, so I would anticipate that would happen again. Yes, Dan?
On your bonding projects page, which is in the back of the packet, the debt service, the D fund in 2017 has 423,192, and it's dropped to $33,076. What's sunsetting there from 2017 to 18? That's the D fund.
Right.
We're paying off all the bands, and 17 will be paid off, so 18 will be one of those bands, where like Alderbrook, Beach Road, all those different projects and bands. Okay. So that's the old estimate.
Were those 5-year bans?
Yeah.
5 years.
So overall, I think given our projections there, and, you know, we try to be as accurate as we can. The bottom line number at the end there, has improved by a couple $1 million. So, you know, again, it can go either way. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Joanne, did you, how do you handle the, use of fund balance? Like we applied fund balance this year, to the budget. How did you handle that going forward? Did you take this year's allocation and apply it equal going forward?
It automatically allocates it based on the revenue and expenses. So on your bottom line, don't you wanna be allocated from fund balance, and then it's deducted from the fund balance amount. That's why our fund balance goes down, because we're using fund balance every year.
Yeah, no, I was wondering how, so the model automatically assigns, at least the amount we're using.
For the property taxes, 1.5%. And what that, our revenue doesn't cover has to come from fund
Right.
balance.
You back into it.
Yeah, I make that point, Mr. Chairman, only because if that's a this is reflecting it as a continuing obligation, so, I mean, the only way to not have that is to have enough revenue
To cover it.
to cover it.
Exactly.
So that's a continuing obligation.
Yeah.
That we have, but it is reflected here. Thank you.
Just some clarity.
Sure.
On the first page, line 36 has the total actual estimated unreserved fund balance
reads across anywhere from in 2012, 16 million and all the way to 2020 at 11 million, but on page 4, I just need an understanding of line 20, the unreserved fund balance unappropriated. Same chart, 2012, 14 million, or excuse me, 18 million, and then it finishes out 2020 at 19 million, almost 20 million. Am I missing the revenues into that, in the first page? Anticipated increases in the levy, and what is the relationship there?
I think the first page is all the funds together, you know, general, county road, machinery, and debt service. I think the fourth page, if I'm looking at the right page here, the unreserved, unappropriated, I believe is just the general fund. It does include Westmount. That would be my take on it. I don't know if this clears it up for you, probably not.
Well, I'm just, on the first page, there would be some concern for me, like 2015, on line 36, it's 24 million, and then by 2020, it's at 11 million.
Right.
But then, on this fourth page, line 20, in 2015 is 25 million, but in 2020, it's 19 million, almost 20 million, so it seems a better perspective, at least, than the first page at 11 million, the 19 million in 2020.
Right.
Is there...
I think the first page is more accurate as to, because it accounts for all the funds, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. The first page is all the unreserved fund balances for all the major funds. And what you're looking at, the fourth page, or whatever it was, that's just the general fund.
General.
And it includes the reserved and the unreserved. That's why you see 19 million. But if you look above, the 14.7 million, that's the unreserved, and you can see that in the front page.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, Supervisor Liggett.
Chairman, what was our target for the, unreserved fund balance going forward? There was
Mike's got that.
earmarked as a
Yeah, there's a range, it's 10, is it 10 to
10 to 16, Mike, or was
16?
it?
half,
9.5?
9.5 million to 16. So we need to stay above that 9.5 million, which the projection, the last projection that we looked at, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, was right around that 9 million mark.
Right.
For
Right.
2019, so we're doing a lot better.
Yep.
The projections look a lot better than what they had even a year ago, than the last one, so. I'm encouraged. I mean, it still is a projection, but I am encouraged.
Now, is that range just for the general fund, or is that overall?
Just the general fund.
Just the general?
And we put that 9.5 million in there because that's basically what I need
Pay
on a
bills.
monthly basis.
Right.
For cash on hand to make sure we, payroll and pay the bills and keep the lights on and all that stuff.
Yes, Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, sir. Line 10, the surplus for 2015, 5,118,000.
Yep.
We had projected in 2015 that we would have a deficit of 2.2 million, so a lot of good things obviously happened, so that's good for the county. Now, Mike, I believe you covered this off in one of your budget memos, you know, where a lot of those savings came from. My question has to do with the Westmount payment. Is the Westmount payment in that number there?
Yes.
It is. And if I recall from your budget memo, you said that the recommendation would be to put that money into a fund in order to pay for the legacy costs of Westmount.
And that was done.
And that's done?
Yep.
That's why that figure dropped from 24 million in 15 to 20 million in 16. reserve for West Mountain.
Okay. I got a couple other questions, guys.
Sure.
Okay. On the debt service, I saw the page on debt service that lays that out. But on the front page, on line item 22 through 25, it's reflected as a net, and I'm sure this is just an accounting practice, but the overall debt service is an actual deficit to the budget, correct? Because we have to make payments.
Right.
That's reflected on the following pages, with the courthouse kicking in full payments in 2018. Did I get that right?
Correct.
Yes, okay. I just wanna make sure I had that right. And then, on the all major funds lines, we've got this great trend of positives from 2012 to 2015. And although I heard what the treasurer said, we're above the $9 million number, and that's awesome, that's good work. But we do show an overall decline of $13 million over the course of 2015 through 2020 on the fund balance. And that's a trend that's almost disconcerting. Do you project that we get kind of caught up at some point, or is that the sort of trend that will continue beyond that and ultimately become a problem? What are your thoughts?
Well, that depends on the actions of the board. I mean, if we hire more employees, or if we do more projects, or, and then there's, costs that we have no control over. I mean, the or the retirement could spike like it has in the past. Sales tax could drop, it's a good guess.
Yeah, I just thought I'd make mention of it. Two real quick ones. I know that Rich Skimmelhorn made a proposal, and I believe Brian was working with John Laffer, his attorney. I was wondering if there was any further effort towards that to impact future income.
I would ask Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is going to be on the Airport Advisory Committee's agendas, because there is a tension there. If you've got one entity who may be a bidder in a situation where a competitive process is going to set up, you don't want to go too far down the road of having that bidder determine what the parameters of the bid specs are going to be. So I think it has to ultimately be up to the board exactly what they want. And I know it's on the Supervisor Seaver's Advisory Committee agenda. They're going to be working on that to decide what options they want to have for the board and perhaps ultimately go out to bid for.
Gotcha. Last question is on the geothermal. I see the payments are going forward with $250,000 plus $1,000 a year. I'm a citizen, I'm not on the inside, I don't know what is being discussed internally. I saw the preliminary report from the auditor. Is there an update on that project, and when the public is going to be made aware of what is taking place for the final audit and discussions we're seeing?
Again, I would refer that to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is going to be a point, I don't know when that is.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Conover.
Yeah, Joanne, the county road unreserved fund balance and the road machinery unreserved fund balance, maybe you could talk a little bit about what went into producing those numbers, because that's what drives, the total number declines, but that's over $3.2 million right there in the negative. Could maybe just describe that a little bit, what went into those numbers?
The county road and road machinery both have federal aid projects. Or road machinery doesn't, actually, county road does. The county road has federal aid projects, and they go up and down every year. And I noticed here in 2020, it goes up to $411,000, or or in 2017, it was 205,000, so there's a big jump in the projects there. The rest is just wages, projected contractual expenses. The department heads actually project those for me. Benefits. Don't think there's anything else changed or anything different in there that we normally see. But it's just our revenues and those codes are not keeping up with the expenses.
Prince Pike, so, let's say we had expenses of, total expenses of $10, and we had revenues of 8, we would show a net of 2, correct? What you're saying is, but if we keep the expenses at 10 and you only get $7 worth of revenue, then your net expense is 3. So what you're showing there, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I'm just trying to put it in language that I can understand. So what you're showing there is you're showing a level of effort on the expenditure side that continues with not as much revenue to help with those expenses, is that correct? And that's what creates the deficit that we see in at least the 3 years of the plan.
Yeah, and one thing we do, we apply property taxes to those 2 codes. And if we applied more, we could apply more property tax and take it away from the general fund to make road machinery and county road whole. And there wouldn't be a negative, but I just showed the tax rate going up 1.5%.
How did you project on the property tax?
1.5 every year.
I think that's important, important for me to understand what those numbers mean in terms of,
And that's why we wanted to show you funds. Actually, this is a little bit different than what we've done in the past. We wanted to show the balance of each fund because in the end, we have to raise property taxes in order to make up the difference. Even though the general fund shows 14 million, in 2020, the road and machinery are negative. So we still have to raise those taxes.
so if you don't want to raise or utilize those funds, you have to reduce your level of effort.
Right.
That's going to be the challenge in those funds going forward, particularly with declining. What revenue or 2 specifically declined the most? Chips went up a little bit.
Chips went up, but it stays flat.
Right.
It doesn't go up every year. It stays flat, so you don't have an increase in chips.
Federal aid?
Federal aid projects may go up the expense. Federal aid usually stays about the same and it's very minimal. And that's about all the county road revenue. Road machinery revenue comes from the department. Renting of equipment.
Yes, Mr.
So
Simpson?
are those deficits, the 1,596,000, are they shown, is the 14,749,000 reflective of those deficits, or does that, so that's coming off
Yes,
those?
yes.
Right.
Off the 14?
That's correct, that's what makes it
Okay.
11.
Right.
That's what
Okay,
makes it
that's what
11, so
down.
it's very important to understand those numbers, as to how you can influence those numbers one way or another going forward.
Yeah.
That's my point, is, where there's gonna need to be greater discussion. Because that's not sustainable. I don't know what it would be in the next year, and the next year, and the next year, but it's a big deal in terms of this operating condition. And it's all important, but that trend is not good.
Yes, Mr. Whitehead?
Thank you. Just to emphasize what Mr. Conover just said, if you look at it, we estimate 1.5% tax each year. You're getting about another $500,000 worth of revenue each year. But for projecting forward, we're losing 2 million every year. So if you're gonna make that up over taxes, 4 times 1.5 for about 60. That might give you a better indication of the spot that you're in.
Yeah. I mean, there's a number of takeaways here. It's a beautiful, as you say, Mr. Chairman, that it's a terrific job. And it really is, I think really helps us focus on, you know, a lot. But in the bigger pictures, it looks like the general fund balance is looking, you know, reasonable, but the, road machinery and equipment, that's gonna need some attention.
Yep.
Right,
Drag
and
it back.
those are items we can focus on. I mean, we have direct impact on that. If we wanna pave more roads or less roads, and do you buy the wish list of equipment every year, or do you cut back? And sooner or later, it catches up with you. It's pay me now or pay me later.
That's where the continued growth in sales tax is important. I know for a few years we budgeted 2 or 2.5%, and you know, we come up short there 2 or 3 times. Then we go flat with no increase or very little increase, and it spikes. So I guess we'll stay flat, you know, 'cause that seems to work better. But that increased growth in sales tax each year is, you know, helps fill the void. No doubt about it. Yes, Mr. Liggett.
The other night at a town board meeting, a citizen brought up the condition of one of the county roads and was wondering why it was taking so long to get paved, and I gave a little bit of background that since 2008, 2009, the county had to cut back some on road maintenance, but we're trying to make up for it now. I hope I was telling the truth on that, and is that still projected? We have some catching up to do. So in these numbers, that is part of that catching up, is it?
I wouldn't say that.
No, I would say that 2.5 is usually what we spend, right?
I wouldn't say there's a decrease in what we've been doing, other than I cut 50,000 in 2017, but, you know, that was from the county dollars. But the CHIPS did increase the Pave New York, so our effort will be a little more actually going in 2017. But we've over the years I've tried to increase what the county puts in. I believe we were at 650 or 700,000, and which is better than we was prior, because we were just using CHIPS.
On the roads, it's all part of the plan to stay on top of the road conditions?
As best we can, yeah. Yes, Mike?
I can't remember what year it was. Wasn't it 2 years ago there was an extra $1 million thrown at it?
Yep, we did that one year too.
Right.
We pulled $1 million out of sales tax.
Yep.
To try to catch up from 2008, it got so bad.
Right. Yes, Rachel?
Like where, and I'm sure I'm just not looking in the right place, but where would the estimated expense of the extension at the airport come in this next year?
That would be a capital expense, I would think. Yeah, it's towards the back.
I'm on the debt worksheet, but the very last worksheet, it shows airport project.
Yep. Very last one.
Well, they don't, I'm sorry, mine are out of order and I don't know page numbers.
It's
It says capital worksheet, okay, got it.
right. Major new capital projects.
The airport project, and that amount for 2017, the 96,000.
Yep.
That's our share,
Correct.
and is that, what projects fall under the airport project?
I'm not sure what projects they have right off the top of my head, but they have a few of them going this year. I think it's probably some expense to the extension, but it's probably also the lighting and those type things that they were doing.
I think they're going.
Anticipate going to design.
Design, okay.
all of those things in.
I did ask him what the cost was to date of the extension, and county dollars is about $24,000 that's been expended.
Right.
So I just, can I just get a breakdown, the best offer breakdown of the project there?
Yep, yep, I don't have that sheet with me, but I do have that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And you can see that in, 2018 and 2019 is the larger expense. Yes, Mr. Conover?
Yeah, Joanne, so, chase this a little more. So what you're showing there in those, in 18, 19, and 20, is what that's really reflecting then is the depletion of the fund balance in those two accounts, is that correct? So really what you're showing there is that by, excuse me here just for a moment, that by 17, by the end of 2017, and Rob, you can jump in here as well, that what that's showing is that the budgeted fund balance is depleted by that point, and if you plan to continue to fund at that level, that those revenues have to come out of your general fund balance, because the 1.5% increase in the property tax and the projection on the sales tax can't keep pace with that. I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that what's pushing that number is the appropriation of those fund balances
Right.
Into those accounts. And
But that's anticipating everything spent also, and that doesn't always happen. Go ahead.
right.
That's Supervisor Simpson.
So in line 34, the 1.9 million deficit is a cumulative deficit over that period.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, and you can alleviate some of that by
okay.
putting more
Yeah,
funds into that.
I just wanna be clear on that one.
You noticed that when Mr. Molina was in charge, we didn't have a deficit.
You're not gonna let up.
No, that was a dig to me.
Oh, all right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for 8 more days.
That's true.
What, Frank, a question just this budget off, what, in terms of the appropriation of fund balance out of those accounts, what's the methodology, what's your thinking relative to that, just to apply it each and every year?
Yeah, to keep your levy increase at 1.5 or approximately there.
Right.
The best plan is to keep it as low as possible, because once you spend it, you have to keep spending it, or you have to buy it back. That's how I look at it, you know. It's real money. I mean,
No, I understand that thinking, because, I mean, one would assume that you have that money there because you wanna buy equipment or do improvements, that's why that money's there.
Yeah, you get a list every year,
Right.
and, you know, you have to look at the list and you have to determine whether, you know, it's a nice to have or a need to have. You hope they're bringing you the need to have, but every now and then they'll throw in something that's nice to have. Frank's not afraid to wield the knife.
and we cut that back, $200,000 or $300,000 from what he has. It's, you know, you gotta have equipment, but,
Yes, you do.
you know, you have to stay within what money you have, but also the best you can. So the answer is to keep them as low as possible, but that's not always possible. Unless the board wants to make, you know, drastic changes. I mean, that could be done.
Well,
Yes.
Well, the adjusted number, I mean, for comparative purposes, in 2015, the general fund, if you take West Mountain, doing 15 what we're doing in the outlying years, just for comparison purposes, we would have been at say $17.5 million in 15, something like that. And so we grew the fund balance, I'm talking about the general fund and reserve fund balance. We grew it, 15, estimated 15 over 16. We might even do a little better than that, if the sales tax stays good, right? We might do a little better than that. But then, when the debt service comes online, you can see its effect, right?
Right.
But even with that, we would go from 17.5 million to just under 15 over that period. If I could, Mr. Chairman, Joanne, those numbers include your use of fund balance for general fund, the general fund budget, correct? So those outlying years would incorporate. How did you do that? Do you take the fund balance that we're appropriating this year and apply it, or do you just put revenue against expense and how exactly do you project?
For 2016, it's revenue against expense, or estimated, plus anything else we know, like additional tobacco funds. 2017 is the same. I did what was budgeted, applying fund balance that was budgeted. And then 18 through 20 is revenue expense, and then the rest takes from fund balance,
Balance the budget.
the balance. So the fund balance reduces every year because we're taking money every year.
For the final 2 or 3 years, that number would reflect a use of the fund balance. That's why it declines.
Yes, Mr. Stroh?
Well, a lot of this is based on assumptions, and if you look at their sales and use tax, we're going from 2016 this year, which is significantly better than what is on here. So, and then your 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020 are based on that base, which is lower than what it actually is. So you have to keep that in mind, Ron, that the revenues, that's a very conservative, and I'm all for that, but it's a very conservative revenue approach. And you just have to keep that in mind, that revenues might actually be higher than that. We hope they are, but the base is not the actual base. We're starting off lower to start with, and then they're projected small increases, but you've already started below what is actually there. So if we used real 2016 numbers for sales tax revenues and then projected from there, it would be a better looking picture.
Right.
That's correct.
Right. Yes. Matt?
I have one more question. Forgive me if you already answered it before, but why are the revenues in the county road and the road machinery consistently decreasing and every other revenue is going up? I mean, what is driving that? Was that estimates from DPW?
Real property tax applied to 2017 budget was lower than what was applied in 20. So I based everything going forward on the 2017 budget, and I increased that 18, 19, 20 by 1.5% each year. But we're starting, just like John just said, we're starting with a lower base, so that would show the revenues going down.
Okay.
But you could alleviate that, like Frank said, if sales tax comes in where he has a little bit extra sales tax, he may wanna, budget that towards the county roads or the machinery.
And what has been the determining factor to decide on how much of the property tax, the real property tax that we put into?
Well, it's all property tax, isn't it, Frank, on that?
On the county road, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's all property tax, other than what you get for chips, and excess money.
Sure.
We have a reserve
Thank you.
Yes, Dan?
Just a point moving forward with some of the things we've done in the past years to cut the budgets and take a look at, you know, these projections going forward in a 5-year program. And one of the things that we did was difficult was get out of the nursing home business. There was quite a few changes with funding sources, et cetera, and we needed to execute that. But going forward, I think the question has to be asked, you know, on, I think it's page 3, line 18 is education. From 2016 here, it's $2,291,000, and it's gonna go up to $2,445,000. I don't know if that's inclusive of the capital bonding for the STEM. Do you know if that's correct? That's an add-on, because I believe that's another $400,000 when we go to bond.
Right. That's, I would think is, assuming the Adirondack,
It might,
there has to be
Is
other.
that just what we pay them every year? It's not the capital.
It's not the capital.
Right.
Not-
so I just asked, you know, as you move forward, as far as what government's supposed to do in supply, you know, should we be into that degree in education? When you go back to the first page in county roads, and, you know, we're looking at, you know, putting in dollars that, you know, with the revenues and expenditure, ultimately, this year, you know, it's $845,000, and if you do the machinery, $645,000 is a negative, so, you know, $1.5 million in our roads. But education, you're putting in near $3 million. Just saying, in a proportionate scale, if you have 1,000 students from Warren County attending ACC, and you have 65,000 residents, budget-wise, this is why you do 5-year projections. You gotta start looking at your priorities. If you're closing nursing homes and selling them, because that isn't a business that government's good or should be in, you know, where do you draw the line with education, and how far do we go with that and continue as far as the support financially, and what can we afford?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, Mr. Whitehead.
I can't let that point go. When you go ahead and say, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and we have problems here. But, you know, when you talk about education and the number of people in the county that serves, and at the same time you have the airport and the number of people that serves, and other things like that. I mean, that's maybe an unfair statement. But when you look at the capital budget here, the elephant in the room is the court bond at over $1 million a year. You know, a year ago that was nothing, and now it's $1 million a year. Those are, you know, decisions that have impacted, you know, going forward considerably. And I'm not sure it could be undone at this point, but those are kinds of things that have to be considered at the time they're being considered. And this is what we get. I mean, $1 million a year.
And I respect, you know, that, but if we've sat here over the years, I think the most frustrating thing that I run into is just the things that we have to do. Now, you can disagree with how we went about them, or how much we spent, or if we could have done them different, but the court project, when I came on board, you know, was postponed because of economic crisis for near 10 years, and it was something that we were supposed to or had to do as a mandated item with all the information that we got. You know, we have to jail people. The jail, we had an audit where we had to put 14 more members on. These are things that we have to do. We have to negotiate contracts with the sheriff's department. There's some things that we just don't have control over. So I'm just saying, the things that you have control over that were thrown on the table that were difficult were closing nursing homes, and we did that. And this is another thing, you know, when ACC wanted to expand, great project, certainly has benefits for the area, but it wasn't a mandated item, and we quickly hopped on that and supported it. Where I don't think the vetting happened with the court projects and all the other things that we've had to do in a capital environment that come and get kind of rammed down our throat. So it's difficult to make decisions when they're made for you in Albany or somewhere else. But the decisions that we have to make at home, whether it's nursing home business or education, they're going to have to start being looked at. Because I certainly think that we did a good job with the court system and how we work with that and move forward with it. We did a good job with the human resource building. We've certainly tried with energy contracts that, you know, didn't pan out, but it wasn't because of lack of effort. But everybody is looking at whether it be solar or ways to save money, do things, look outside the box. We've recently heard that the Forum might be up for sale. We hear the hotelers that come in and say that we need to extend our shoulder seasons in tourism where we make our money and sales taxes derive from. You know, those are the kind of things that when I came on board, we were going to build a convention center 10 years ago, and the Pinnacle study said that we probably wouldn't, you know, get the utilization that we needed out of it. So we dropped it. There's been no forward thinking as far as extension of the tourism season, but yet when it comes to education, we automatically fund it to the tune of almost $3 million. Where if we did a forum or a large venue of some sort that could work for this area, there's many benefits and derivatives that come out of it. So that discussion needs to happen as we move forward and as we fund different things like education and other things.
Yes, Rachel?
Dan, I just want to remind you as well, as we're talking about education, that legislation was pending, and I haven't followed to see if it was passed or not, but I believe that it was, regarding capital contributions per student. So we want to be very careful in looking at that whole scenario and the investment we've made here, because it can come back to where we're then obligated for our capital FTE. Right now, we're paying towards our operating expenses, but historically, we've never paid that capital per FTE. So if it changes to that, and we can use this project towards that legal requirement that we would have. So I think that as it relates to education, we get hit either way on it. And so that was something that we really did discuss quite a bit this year, and what, in fact, it would cost us more under that legislation. So I do, you know, just want to make sure that we're all aware of that and what's coming down the pike, and that we can use this upgrade at the college towards our legal requirement there. But the one part I didn't hear mentioned was the airport, and you're right, we aren't operating a nursing home, we don't operate the railroad, but yet we are operating the airport. And if there's a way to decrease the expense there and increase those revenues, I hope that this year will be the year we take a hard look at it, because that, again, is an option for us, that we continue to say is a good idea, but aren't looking really hard at.
Well, we have decreased expenses
Yeah.
and increased revenues to the tune of a couple $100,000 over the last 4 or 5 years.
But as we all know, what we've heard is.
But, you know, there's,
Which is great, you know, I think that's a really good point, Frank. But I just think the airport needs to fall into that same
Yep.
topic of discussion that you're having with education and these other topics. But the education piece is important because we would still have that legal requirement.
right. Now, can that be depreciated, or like depreciated and used for years going forward?
She did what it could when we vetted back this year when we looked at the, that project. I don't know if anything has changed, but at that time,
Right.
We did have that discussion with her, so.
Right, I remember talking
Okay.
about that.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Conover?
Yeah, I just, be my final comment on what I see. By the way, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Joanne, Rob, Mike, terrific. It's a terrific tool. You know, the projection on the, those two funds, particularly the road and the machinery fund, you see how quickly that comes into the financial plan. It's not sustainable. So, we really need to begin to be thinking about that, because I think up above, the general fund, frankly, I think, based on where we are right now, that we may do better in 16. I think you're correct, Mr. Shaw. I think we will do better, and we may do better in the outlying years as well. But you can see by 2019, just a couple of years from now, that starts pushing $1 million per fund in climbing, and climbing. And that is, you know, there's no amount of sales tax good news and no amount of other revenue good news that can sustain that. I mean, we had a difficult time even with the Department of Corrections. You recall this 14 employed, $1.2, $1.3 million increase in our operating condition. We still haven't fully overcome that and the impact of that, because that's a recurring each year additional cost. I'm not saying it wasn't needed. The audit said it was, but those numbers are not.
Right.
We need to be putting some attention on those numbers, on what, if anything, can be done to abate what this picture is showing in some fashion. I suspect it's a mix of a lot of things, not the least of which is on the revenue side, but also on the expenditure side as well.
One thing, if the governor would sign the Fahey, get the senator's name, if he'd sign that bill, that would, over 6 years period, 7-year period, would take over the end of the defense, public defender cost.
Yeah.
That would help a lot.
Well, I'm beginning to wonder, though, there's been some talk about...
Instead of pushing it on to us, you know,
right.
pay for it. If that's what you want to do, pay for it.
There may be some things that we need to think about privatizing that maybe heretofore we haven't thought about privatizing. Even if we just rid ourselves of the legacy costs on the benefit side, it would be significant. In other words, even if those dollars had to go into program, the legacy costs associated with the benefit, what are we running at, almost 50%, more than 50% now? What are we running at on the benefit side? Over 50%. So, plus the healthcare costs are a big number. I mean, a very big number in this operating budget. And what we do there going forward is going to be very, very important. And we need to be focused on that number, because it's been going up like a rocket ship. And those are not numbers that we have as much control over.
Right.
The only thing we can do there is to try to stay flexible in terms of what we offer and what the cost is. Hopefully our healthcare consultants will be back to us with some ideas in that regard. But it's conceivable to me that you could be seeing we could influence those numbers by quite a bit as well.
Yes, Mr. Liggett.
On employee benefits fringes, line 25 on maybe the second page, it goes into the negative numbers starting in 2018. So expenditures, negative number, how does that work? Number 25 under expenditures by function in the general fund.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
That is turnover rate that I calculate based on, an average of 25 employees turnover. And like a tier 4 employee in retirement will go away, and a tier 6 employee start work. So it's the difference between those two. So you end up getting a negative number. Our benefits are reduced by that amount. Explain that okay?
So.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, how do you book a negative expenditure?
Well, it's a projection. Just a projection. We're assuming we'll lose 25 people countywide.
Okay.
And replace them with someone at tier 6, which is a much less cost for their retirement.
just
they're
the net
basically
savings, you show the net savings, it's not allocated to departments. So it's just a figure on the schedule to show the net savings.
you can't really tell what the department's gonna lose in employees.
Okay.
You do it countywide, at least I know.
Then, one other question then, is that, for the Health and Human Services building, that continues to, increase, to 2020, what happens after that? I wasn't around when that was done, so I don't know the layout. It would be under, four years, that worksheet 2017-2020, I would make one page. Under the, MVCDA bonds general fund.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure how much more it goes up. I do know that in, I think 2023, I think that's the year, the top one, the public safety building and communications upgrade comes off.
It's off,
So that's like $1 million drop.
We financed that when I first came on board here and saved ourselves over $1 million on that one.
On the interest.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
The human service, when did that building come on, 2009?
I think so, 9 or 10, right? Yep.
Right, so you figure the 20-year note from there forward, so.
Right.
That'll take you out to whatever.
But it's structured that we keep paying more each year?
Well, it kinda goes like a curve, it goes up in the middle and then it starts coming back down on the other side. And I don't know where it peaks, yeah.
Matt?
I just wanted to comment on the, you know, it is concerning to see these deficits on the county roads and the road machinery, 'cause, you know, the one thing that we do know is deferring, not finding a solution to this issue is gonna be more costly down the road. You know, 'cause we know that, just cutting our roads is a means to nowhere, just bigger expenditures. So, we really have to nail this down.
Yeah, I agree. Dan?
Brian, Rachel just said that there was some legal requirement or that we fund the college. That's the first I've heard of that. What reference what she's speaking of?
I don't have any idea. I can try to find out. I don't have any idea as I sit here right now.
The finances, you know, that's
We have to
finance.
spend a certain amount each year, right, to meet the state requirement.
Yeah, I think what she was, what Rachel was referring to is, how they, apply the dollars we spend at the college in terms of, what can be counted for capital and not a capital. I think you're both correct, actually. I think Rachel's correct in the manner in which she was saying it, but our approval is required for, major like the Nine Stone project, our approval is required, as well as Washington County's. That project couldn't have proceeded, with our funding, without our approval.
There's two separate I mean, there's the capital and then there's the operating. Right now, we contribute a chargeback to the operating. But down the road, there's supposed to be a chargeback that's calculated for the, capital. I'm not sure if John wants to explain.
Mr. Stroh?
The money that we contribute on an annual basis is towards operating funding, and there's no legal strict criteria about what counties were to pay. I mean, if you wanna go back to the origination of community colleges, it originally was one-third from the state, one-third from the counties, and the one-third for operating expenditures would come from tuition. That's varied a little bit as the years have gone by. The states have gone down, counties contributed and tuition's now up to about 50%. So, you know, there's been those shifts for various reasons, but those are for operating expenditures. Your chargebacks, that goes to capital, you know, your maintenance items and on-campus things.
But right now, we're not required to do a chargeback capital, which is what Dan's referring to, is that requires the board's approval. But what Chris Duffy was talking about was the legislation that was pending, that it would require counties to give, if we don't give a capital chargeback allocation, that means all our surrounding counties would not have, they would have to match what we give. And because technically we don't give any right now, it causes a deficit in all of the other counties that have to pay into Warren County when their students come to this community. So what she was saying is if that requirement takes place, there's an argument to be made that the other counties wouldn't have to give anything. So if we didn't move forward with this project, which now counts as the capital chargeback, that we could be in a situation where all these other counties would not have to give anything towards that capital chargeback.
That was proposed, that
Right.
hasn't been.
No, that won't go anywhere.
And
But
But Chris made a
But
solid
as
point.
far as chargeback goes, the concept behind chargeback is that people who are attending your community college that is sponsored by your county or counties, and they're coming from other counties, they should pay what we pay to educate that particular student. That's the concept behind a chargeback. But there's a formula to it, so it involves different fluctuations. And there is talk down in Albany to simplifying that formula and making it just what it's supposed to be, basically a certain charge from a student that's not part of the sponsoring counties, that they paid their fair share for going to that college. And those chargebacks, that amount usually is put towards, you know, on-campus capital expenditures.
Yes, sir.
But I think when our partner, when Washington County was considering or asking for legislation to have a dedicated fund from a mortgage receipt, it struck me that here we have this college campus, all of these buildings, all of this infrastructure, and it would be great if at some point in time we could find ourselves in a situation where even if it were a modest amount, establish some kind of dedicated cash stream, because these things do come to us with large dollars assigned to them. And I'm just speaking now beyond the operating. I'm just saying, as we look at this physical, the plant and the buildings and the roads and all of this infrastructure, it would be good if we, on the wish list, I understand from a budget officer's point of view, that's what I'm talking about, but it would be good to have some kind of dedicated, because sometimes you go 4 or 5 or 6 years, right? 7 years, 10 years, however long before we get called upon to find those dollars in a tight operating budget.
Yeah, I got that down.
It's extremely, what's that?
Basically a capital plan.
Right. That would be worthy of our time to be thinking in those terms. I'm not sure legally or budgetarily what would be required.
Yeah.
To have some type of stream there that, even if it didn't cover all the expense that we could call upon. I was just looking down the road, I'm saying if our partner ends up with a dedicated stream for capital projects, that puts us in an interesting, maybe more difficult spot, especially if we're dealing with just hand them out like we have been.
Okay. Motion to adjourn?
Sure. Moved by Dan, seconded by John. Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas to everyone.
Okay.
Dan,
Merry Christmas.
Dan,